There is a serious pneumonia outbreak in China. Pediatric hospitals are overwhelmed in China, and there is a global concern regarding the outbreak, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk more on the recent outbreak in China, we have with us Dr. Nikolai Petrovsky, Research Director at Vaccine Proprietary Limited. Dr. Petrovsky is joining us live from Australia. Thanks very much for joining us here on WION, Doctor.
It's a pleasure.
Right. Now, Dr. Petrovsky, the outbreak was first reported in northern China with a significant number of cases involving children. How concerning is this?
Look, we have to appreciate that China is currently going into winter. So this is a normal time to get respiratory viruses like influenza, respiratory syncytial viruses, COVID-19, of course. And so it may just be that as they go into winter, they've had a surge of these what we might call normal infections that can cause children to get high fevers. So at this stage, we shouldn't be panicking, but obviously we need to know more.
Right, Doctor, you speak of how this is a regular phenomenon taking place in China because of the onset of winter. But the report suggesting that there are many hospitals in China which are overwhelmed with children who are sick due to this unknown pneumonia outbreak in the country.
Yes, and we have to remember that, if we look back to November 2019, the same thing happened. Not so much in children, in adults, and we were told this was just a normal surge in influenza in China. Of course, that turned out not to be true. It actually was the first signals that they had an outbreak of SARS-CoV-2, causing COVID-19. So we should never downplay the significance of these outbreaks, and obviously we need information on what are the viruses that are actually causing these children to be sick. Fortunately, we have very good diagnostic tools now with PCR tests that should be able to rapidly identify within a few days what exactly are the viruses and are there any new viruses in these children that we need to be concerned about.
Dr. Beijing's National Health Commission told the reporters just last week that the respiratory illness spike was due to the lifting of COVID-19 restriction. What is your assessment on that?
Yes, certainly, Australia lifted our restrictions about a year ago, well ahead of China. And we've seen a surge in infections similarly caused by influenza, respiratory syncytial viruses. So all the viruses that were kept at bay by some of the COVID mitigation strategies have come back in a big way. So we did see a surge in those viruses in Australia, as I say, over the last year. And so it may well be that China, having just opened up, is seeing the same phenomena. But of course, we can't assume that. What we need is viral sequence data from those sick patients to tell us exactly what is causing this, because at this point, we simply don't have that information.
Right. The WHO has now formally requested Beijing for more information on this outbreak, noting that it was still unclear if the outbreak in China and the overall increase in respiratory infections previously reported by the Chinese authorities were linked or not. What is your take on this?
So look, this is really important that information is shared early. As we saw during COVID, unfortunately, there was a reluctance by authorities to share data, and we could argue that the whole pandemic was caused by that. If we'd known very early on what was happening, maybe we could have stopped SARS-CoV-2 in its tracks. So I think this early request for information and hopefully, the transparency of the Chinese authorities in revealing exactly what is happening, might avert potentially a future pandemic.
Right, I was just coming to that this is not the first time that there is an outbreak of an illness in China. The country has poured billions of dollars into lab construction and genetic engineering in a bid to become a science power. But safety practices, they fail to keep up in China.
Look, again, it's a double-edged sword. It's fantastic that China, is pushing forward with research facilities to study viruses. That's very important. But at the same time, they have to be very, very careful with how those facilities are managed, because it is possible to get accidents happening. Where these viruses could potentially escape from a laboratory. So, as I say, it's great they're investing in these facilities, but at the same time, there is a need for caution and being very careful in how these viruses are handled, because, it is easy for viruses potentially to escape.
Last question to you, Dr. Petrovsky. What are some of the preventive steps that people in China can take against this mysterious pneumonia outbreak?
So as we saw, over the last 3 years, while we were taking strategies to reduce COVID, we actually saw a massive reduction in influenza and all of these other respiratory viruses. So what were people doing differently? I think, they certainly were washing their hands more. They were being more careful to distance themselves, certainly from someone who was showing symptoms, and ideally anyone who does have new respiratory symptoms like a cough or sneezing or high temperature, they shouldn't be going into public places where they could potentially be transmitting that infection to others. So I think being careful about hygiene, being careful about distancing, particularly in crowded places, and avoiding people who have symptoms exposing themselves to others is what needs to be done to reduce the risk of transmission.
Right. Thanks very much, Doctor, for joining us in WION and sharing your insights with us on the story.
Always a pleasure.